Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Robert Stickle, and I'm also joined by my colleagues Jim Patterson and Paul Estabrooks. Jim and Paul will be today's presenters, and we'll discuss the topic of do you have the resources needed to meet your strategic objectives and key results? As always, I hope that today's presentation grants you some insight into the world of project and portfolio management and gets you excited for the new developments happening within the industry and here at OnePlan. Remember, if you'd like a copy of these slides or have any questions, feel free to reach out to us at contact@oneplan.ai and we'd be more than happy to assist you. Thank you again, and I'll now turn the presentation over to Jim.
Thanks, Robert, and welcome everybody. This is a timely topic this time of year. People start their planning process for 2022, and that has an aspect of it for mapping out strategy, making investments of both dollars and people and resources in order to meet those strategies and the key results that you want out of those strategies or those outcomes. Let alone the fact that resource management is something we have to grapple with ongoing throughout the course of the year, even when we're not doing strategic planning. So our goal here today is to give you some good information regarding resource management and how that can be done in an effective and flexible fashion. So with that, let's get started. Just a little bit about why we talk about these topics. And OnePlan Solutions is consistently recognized as a leader, as a Microsoft Gold certified partner in multiple areas. But our particular emphasis in project and portfolio management has got us recognition once again in 2021 as their Global Partner of the Year in that discipline, as well as a finalist for that award in both Power Apps and Power Automated. And when it comes to applying these things in different portfolio management disciplines, not only do we help people in the more traditional project and portfolio management approaches, but we're also certified with Scaled Agile Inc. as a Scaled Agile partner, so we can help people regardless of in their more traditional, more agile or scaled agile approaches, as well as more hybrid approaches to this. We have some good subject matter expertise and experience in these areas. We also help with the technology of the solutions you're going to see today that Paul Estabrooks is going to demonstrate to you. But to be successful in these things really requires addressing both the people and the process dimensions. So to the degree that you would like assistance on these things, OnePlan is equipped to help and provide you the assistance that you would need for successful adoption and outcomes of solutions like you're going to see today. So if we start with really Resource Management 101 and what we mean by resource management, we talk about it as the efficient and effective deployment and allocation of an organization's resources when and where they are needed, getting the right people and the right skills on the right things at the right time. The benefits of tackling this type of discipline is, one, to give you better resource visibility to understand where your resources are committed or where they're working. Increase business value by getting people on the right things that bring about the best returns and the best value to the organization. We also want to save time and money because we want to be more efficient in the way we deploy resources and not be redundant or wasteful in the way we spend our time. We'll also have increased project success rates just in and of the fact that sometimes if you don't have these disciplines in place, we may be committing resources blindly to a variety of initiatives or projects without full visibility into the fact that we're teeing them up for failure because they just can't possibly do it all. So the idea is to be able to accommodate demand, but prioritize that demand in a way to make sure that we're working on the right things with a resource level that we can actually fulfill with. And if we're not overloading and overburdening our resources blindly, it can lead to better employee satisfaction as they are more clear on what they should be working on and hopefully more reasonable workloads. So resource management challenges that we see that organizations are facing in this modern age, and some of them are not just related to the modern age, they've been historical in things that organizations face. And we find as an organization that people come to us trying to address resource management obstacles in their organization on a very frequent basis as a primary driver. But things that we run into is things like resource ownership. Are these projects and initiatives, are the people that run those projects, do they actually own or manage those resources, or do they have to solicit assistance from a functional organization or a resource management group in a more matrix type of function? So can we get the right resources we need when we need them, and are we in control of that process at all? Resource focus, as we get assigned as people to a myriad of things, How do we know what the organization's priorities are? What are the things that we should do first as opposed to second and third? Where should we be spending the predominance of our time when we have conflicts or things that we have to make choices on? Non-project workload. As we think about project and portfolio management in a project context, oftentimes our bandwidth is often already committed ahead of being assigned anything on more operational, administrative, or organizational types of things. And to realistically do resource management, we have to have some method in some way, of which there are many, to factor in that non-project workload. And then resource tracking. We can forecast and plan where we think we want to put people, but where are they actually working? What are they actually spending their time in? And does it look anything at all like what we had planned? Or is it unfolding in a way that's different than we thought? Resource visibility. Do both the people who manage the resources and manage the bandwidth of the overall organization, as well as the people performing the work, do they have sufficient visibility into seeing what's on their plate, what's coming up, when they might free up, right? Or if they're working on things that are fruitful or potentially redundant to other things that others are working on in the organization. And then resource reporting as an output of this. People that aren't involved specifically hands-on in the resource management process probably need to have visibility into what that means in the aggregate from a capacity versus demand, or even understanding where people are expected to be spending their time. And then overall, we can end up with too much information. Because this is time-phased information over times, days, weeks, months, whatever it might be, over different horizons, we can end up with matrices of information on resource management that can very much look like an eye chart. And how do we turn that into useful information rather than just a bunch of data that's being thrust upon us so that we can make good decisions and use it as good decision support material? So as we think about resource management steps, and this aligns with some things the Gartner Group has put out. But to start out, if we think about starting from the more simple and easiest to tackle on through more challenging disciplines, resource capacity planning is really where people need to start in many cases. And sometimes that's the level of detail that they can actually sustain initially or even ongoing. And that might be, I need these many FTEs of these people or these roles on these projects over a period of time at that high level, maybe even on a monthly basis, maybe down to a weekly basis, but typically resource capacity on a monthly basis. And then by at least having visibility into that and then be able to see where people are supposed to, where we think they're working, can give us a good sanity check. Do we even have the wherewithal to deliver on what it is we've committed to? Now, detailed resource allocation next would be having specific work items and getting people specifically allocated to specific tasks within schedules or backlogs and those types of things, and understanding where they're tactically going to be working to fill that capacity, more of a bottoms-up exercise as opposed to more of a top-down exercise that resource capacity is. And then resource work management is advancing that maturity a little farther to where you're actually factoring in all types of work, whether it be operational, whether it be administrative, whether it be planned or unplanned work, and factoring in the things so that we actually have a realistic picture of where people can actually spend their project time, et cetera. The last two are really about maturity types of things where team dynamics and team formation and getting more efficient as teams is ways that we can improve our resource management execution. And then personal productivity really gets down to the individual level, and within the disciplines and the systems and the approaches that are in place, how do we make and become our best selves individually as resources? So these are kind of the stepping stones that people might take through a resource management journey. So if we think about the maturity dimensions, things to consider on what you were willing or able to tackle from a resource management discipline. One might be just starting with roles and resources. What are the roles we have? What resources do we have within those roles? And can we allocate them loosely to projects and other types of work efforts within the organization at that high capacity planning level? Because that goes into planning and tracking granularity. Do you want to just stay at a capacity planning level? Do you just want to track, forecasting of that information, or do you want to get down to specific individual work items or tasks? Approval and negotiation, that gets into resource ownership. I, as a project manager or as a project organization, may have a need and say, I need this discipline for this project over this period of time. But the negotiation may have to happen with a functional organization or a resource manager that is responsible for those organizations, or they could be shared services types of resources within the organization. So is that required approval and negotiation? Governance and prioritization. How do we determine what are the right things to be putting these resources on? And do we have a decision-making process in place to help prioritize and then choose and then ensure that the resources are working on those things? Forecasting versus actual. Planning a forecast of a resource capacity plan is one thing, but to ongoingly base future plans on realistic information, you probably want to track actuals at some point potentially. And that might be seeing where people actually spent their time as opposed to where you thought they were going to spend their time, and do analysis on that that can impact future forecasts based upon the reality of the way we're doing business. And then resource costs. Do you want to have dollars associated with these resources and roll them up to financials? That's probably the end level of financial resource maturity that you might want to make in your resource management process. Now, we talked a little bit about capacity planning and more resource allocation, and that's really that top-down versus the bottom-up. The capacity plan, you may actually plan only from the top down, but only through resource allocation and putting people onto specific work items, et cetera, are you going to get that bottoms-up view of rolling up efforts from detailed tasks, or even from timesheets that you get actual feedback from on where people are actually spending their time. And I think in a mature process, ultimately, ideally, you'd want to balance this and actually factor in all those dimensions. So when we talk about resource management today, it's not a standalone process. If I look at the nodes in the blue at the bottom and looking through a resource management sequence where you identify generic roles in the organization, determine the quantity of each role you have, identify constraining resources and or people that you have in that resource pool. And then at that point, it really starts to intersect with the portfolio and project management process. Because in that top gray area, you're fielding ideas and requests or demand. You're making decisions on what you want to do, go, no go, maybe put business cases in places. And then you actually end up with this proposed portfolio of things you'd really like to do as an organization. But that is mitigated and limited and constrained somewhat by the resources you have in place. That being said, some reconciliation has to happen on whether or not we actually do things or how we time sequence projects, so we may not be able to do everything at the time that it's desired to have. And then ultimately you match high level demand to that supply. And most organizations have some type of role with governance or steering committee that approves the portfolio that we work on and say, this is where we're going to invest these resources. And then the project managers or project organization would then request resource allocation for specific people to fill those roles within the constraints of the people that we actually have. So this is how these two things would work together ideally within an organization. So in the understanding of resource capacity, capacity is really how many people or resources do I have that can work on projects? How much time are they available for projects, and what roles, because some people are multifaceted, what roles could they potentially play on those types of projects? Demand is really about determining the resources required for each project, prioritizing those projects, and then allocating resources based on role and priority until those resources are exhausted. And I mean used up, not exhausted and being tired, which can happen as well. And then, hopefully, in a mature fashion, we would develop projects based on a committed availability and say, we can only do what we've been given as far as resources and not extend beyond that. And we wouldn't start projects until resources are available. So if we don't have the resources, we won't start the projects, and we won't set expectations that we'll start until resources free up if we have that resource dimension fully planned out. Now, what are people doing today? Many people are using Excel because it's there. Why? It's freely available. We all know how to use it to a certain extent, different degrees of expertise there. And we may be unaware or maybe not have access to alternatives that are focused on resource management. The problem is it will solve a need and fill a gap, but it isn't a system or a solution. It doesn't really have standards. It's very individual in the way people model. It is a very manual and static model. So in a time-phase thing like resource management, as things change over time, you're changing things cell by cell, line by line in order to model changes to the resource situation on the ground. And that can be very time-consuming. It's very easy to break formulas and calculations in spreadsheets. There's real no dynamic visibility of resource capacity versus demand, and it's time-consuming when things change. let alone the fact that it's disconnected from your project execution or project schedule information. So it doesn't provide organization-wide necessarily visibility and insights for overall reporting without a lot of manual intervention. And we talked about things like the governance, and we'll talk today about strategic alignment of projects to company objectives. Does this resource plan even jive with what we want to do as an organization strategically? Another thing to factor in is the changes in the marketplace, and organizations, according to the analysts like Gartner, are going more in an agile direction. And if you transform from right to left on this, from more traditional waterfall project portfolio management, and as people maybe strive to maybe be even full agile over on the left-hand side, the reality is most organizations stay, and the analysts bear this out, in that adaptive portfolio management realm, where they have a combination of agile, combination of waterfall, and maybe some blended approaches of those in the mix. The idea is we need resource management approaches that will apply no matter where you're at on this spectrum. Now, adaptive PPM, that is more than just whether you're agile or not. Adaptive PPM also brings in the factor of multiple portfolios in organizations. This diagram would suggest that adaptive means you might have a project portfolio, a program portfolio, an IT service portfolio, maybe a product portfolio, maybe even other types of portfolios that you have in here, like application portfolios. And the key here is we have to factor all this in if we're going to have a truly adaptive approach and have a holistic view of our resources. So folks like Gartner in recent publications will tell you that resource management is still critical with increasingly agile approaches. Resources are still limited and scarce, and whether or not we allocate things in teams, self or dedicated teams, there are still limits to that, and there may be fixed capacity, and then we're choosing on how we're going to allocate those teams on a more dedicated fashion. But the resource management challenges still exist. And the other piece of it is we need to consider all work types. There's unscheduled or unplanned work that happens in operations all the time. We have to factor in that that's going to happen to some degree. And that may be different by different natures or types of resources. The scheduled work, the things like schedules that we're planning or are being prescriptive within our project plans. And even routine stuff, there's planned maintenance and other operational things that could be combined with the unscheduled or unplanned work that happens operationally that we have to factor in that. So to do this well, we probably on some measure have to factor in all these different dimensions of work types. And the other thing to consider is that it must be an ongoing process. We can't just say we're going to do a resource plan and look at it as a picture. You know, in the near term, we want to be looking at in this kind of cake model, that Q1 cake, and say, okay, here's the capacity plan that we have by work type, but then maybe actually track the actuals in the current quarter to understand how we're using resources, because that may change our planning assumptions in Q2 and Q3. And we need to revisit this on an ongoing basis, and quarterly might not even be enough in a fast-moving organization. So we need a transformative solution, something that's more than a spreadsheet, something with a modern UI, a central data store and repository, processes for the resource management process embedded into it, some actionable intelligence, alignment with strategies of the organization, scenario modeling for what ifs, and easy updates of changes as things evolve or roll out and as they change in your circumstance. And OnePlan is here to provide that for you, connecting that execution or strategy level, down to that execution level from a portfolio and a resource management perspective that gives you the tools that you need to bring this together and give you it in a way that makes sense to sustain it and to use it as a tool to help make decisions. That strategic level fits on top of all this. You can actually plan out a strategy plan to execute on strategies and align your projects with these. So that can be a factor when you actually do your resource allocations to make sure that you're allocating resources to the highest priority strategies in your mix. So Paul's going to show you here today, and I won't belabor on the pictures, you'll get these slides about visual resource capacity planning within individual projects, being able to look at those capacity plans organization-wide, where resource managers can see across the board where resources are, or maybe even do negotiation. Be able to do resource portfolio what if and analysis to look at the projects that we want to do and look at what the resource requirements would be against that and make adjustments according to the realities. And then financial planning. This can all feed into costs on labor costs based upon the resource planning without you having to redo that. And the idea is it can flow through from your resource planning as well, and the reporting around that. So we want to provide you one interface, one experience, and OnePlan is meant to provide that. And today we're going to be focusing on the resource management and how that dovetails with the portfolio management discipline in this context. So with that, I'd like to hand this over to Paul Estabrooks, who'll give you a demonstration of these things in action.
You, Jim. I'm going to walk through a few things today that Jim covered, and a few of them I'm going to sort of touch at a high level just to sort of give you a sense of where this all fits together. I'm going to start in a kind of a different place than you might expect. I'm going to actually start with strategy. Of note, I'm doing this demo inside a Teams frame. I just happen to choose that demo environment, so I'm just going to shrink that. But you can see we are in Teams doing this particular demo session today. So in our strategy section, this is where you can articulate what are our objectives. It's again part of this time of year we're starting to look at what do we want to accomplish in a new fiscal or a new calendar year, and we want to articulate what are those core objectives. And underneath that, what are the key results that we will use to quantify or to define or determine that we've met an objective. Reach these key results, then we've met the objective. That's sort of the purpose of this OKR model. I start here, Jim had a slide with this on it, because I want to talk a little later about how we connect this to projects and then how we can look at resourcing to ensure that we are devoting our resources to, say, our most important objective, or in the story I will tell, an objective that's off track and how we might fit that. So I wanted you to see sort of where we capture that here in the tool to start. Now, if I jump over to the portfolio, I'm going to switch views here just quickly. We have two portfolios in our portfolio view. And then when I expand those, you can see we have a variety of programs and projects underneath that. Stuff we've shown before. And I want to sort of dive into one of these, and I want to spend a bit of time on this. A couple of things I want to highlight because it's going to fit the story as we go. There's those objectives that we articulated. This particular one is linked to 3 of them. It's also linked with a specific division of budget or assignment of value to 3 different key results. So that when we want to do reporting later on, what was the investment in achieving a specific key result, it would consolidate all of these wherever there is an assignment there, and to the level that we assigned to that particular key result, as opposed to double counting. So just some concepts that more get into the strategy alignment, but here's where the resourcing starts to fit the story. Jump over to the resource plan. So the idea being, this is a new project we're considering doing next year, and we need to sort of build out this resource plan, as well as the other business case data that was on that details page. Ultimately, financials, look at the budget and so forth. That's actually next week's webinar. And then the actual schedule and execution of the project in the work plan. But here we are with in the resource plan, and this is where we're going to capture that demand. Jim talked about that in his slides. We're going to define what are the people that we need on this project. And you can see in the resource plan here, we have a combination of generic roles such as project manager and developer, and a list of individuals, named individuals that we've either had assigned to the project because we're in the process of planning it out, or we've actually requested them. You can also see we have this blue and green dot. I won't demo all of the negotiations, but here we have a couple of proposed resources and people that have been committed. So the PM or someone filling out this initial sort of pass could propose specific roles or named resources so that a resource manager can look at this, and I'll show that in a minute, and make some decisions on how and who should be assigned to that work, and how to deploy their team or deploy the resource pool, depending on how you're structured. So it starts here, capturing that demand and information. As we progress, we have a schedule. This particular project is connected to Project Pro. I'll jump back here, I'm in the backlog. It's also connected to DevOps, but I wanted to highlight Project Pro. Here we are. If I expand that out, you'll see all the tasks, and you'll see resources that have been assigned. So the people that were in that original resource plan, we're now starting to deploy them. So if I walk back to the resource plan for a second and I switch my view, we're starting to pull that data in. where do we have people scheduled on this project coming from the project schedule, and then I can compare that to what we originally had committed or requested. So that I can have that understanding of, I asked for someone to this level, I'm now starting to build my schedule, how is it aligning with the data that I originally submitted or the request that I made? And then ultimately, once we get doing the project, I can start to pull in data coming from the timesheet, which is right here, and pull that in. There's nothing in this particular project yet, and start to review what is the timesheet data? What is the actuals coming in? So what did I ask for? What did I schedule? What actually happened? So if I jump back to committed, just to provide a clean view, I can now look at it and say, oops, wrong one, compared to my schedule. And this one I'm looking at where the color coding is where committed is scheduled is less than committed. I might want to flip that around. I could and look at it the other way. But you can see here as we're sort of starting to get organized, I thought I was going to do, Jack's going to do 8 hours in that particular month, but there's none scheduled. Well, why is that? Is this project not getting going in the right time? What's going on? Here I've got tasks scheduled when there was none committed. I might want to look into that a bit more. I could flip the thing around so that those would highlight red. But we're providing that PM, this is sort of on the execution side, with that rich information, all the way through to how you schedule and then how you consume actuals. Now I want to step back a little bit. I go back to the portfolio. And here I can look at all my resourcing and make some decisions. So I'm going to do a couple of different scenarios. I'm going to do one now, and then I'll jump to another one in a minute. First one is under project prioritization. So what I want to look at as an organization, we have all these projects in, and I want to understand what is our resourcing commitment levels. And you can see we have lots of red and some big numbers where we have more work specifically laid onto some people than they could possibly do. And so this is a what if analysis. So I could come down here. I'm going to take out the proposed and on holds to start. I want to get a clearer picture of what's going on there we go. What's going on with what's active? So I'll take out a couple more here just while I'm thinking about it. Take these out. You can see each time I do that, the table down below, we're working through this. We're not going to get all the way there, but we're starting to see, okay, based on just the active work, we have these over allocations. I'm looking up here, I set this to look at, to zoom to quarters so that I could just have a cleaner view. Now I can start to look at a project like this and say, well, I want that out into later in the year because it might help sort of fix some of these challenges. I'm going to move this one out as well. And it's going to start to calculate there. Maybe I'll move this one forward. That doesn't make sense because it's already active. But you can move projects around. We're in a what if scenario. Maybe we want to accelerate one. Maybe we want to delay one. We're looking to try and resolve some of those resourcing issues down below. And then ultimately, we may not get all the way there, and we may have to say, well, that informs us that we need to hire, or we need to add resources, or expand work hours, or shift them from other non-tasks that we're not tracking here to try and get this work done. So we could settle in on a model and decide, okay, where are we? Do we have the information we need? Have we leveled this as best we can? We've made some decisions. So I'm going to play out sort of the next piece of that story quickly, and then I'm going to come back to this. This is my overall resource plan, and I can see all of my resources. This is IT, this is the tasks, the projects that Adam is on, and so forth. This is my product development team. And I can quickly start to look at these, make some decisions around who I might replace on a project. You can see Jack is unbelievably over allocated. So we're going to want to go through an exercise of potentially trying to add different resources to that, so we can look at who we might kind of find a resource. I need a developer, so I'm going to go by role and look for who are all my developers. I quickly see what I have in terms of availability and start to move work around, the kinds of things that a resource manager would do. So to summarize, we captured the initial demand on that project. What is the request? What's the resources it would need? A resource manager would use screens like this and this data to make decisions to say, you can have these individuals on your team, this one's not available, and can move things around and constantly react to the changing world that we all live in. But if you're planning out sort of a new fiscal year, you'd want that master list, or at least that initial first pass, or maybe just the next quarter, because that's the lens you want to look at and start to make these resourcing decisions. What's important? What do we want to get done the next quarter? What would we need? Where do we have bottlenecks? Where do we have over allocations? How are we going to move those around? Maybe move projects, delay projects, or add headcounts. Now, I started with the strategy for a reason, because what I want to sort of show is a different scenario. So I'm going to come back here. I'm going to reload. Just let me reload my prioritization screen for a second. And I'm going to start a different one. I'm going to come in here and say, actually, let me back up for 1 second. I want to show you something first, just sort of set the stage. In this particular objective, you could see down here, increase our brand awareness is an off-track objective. We're not on track to meet that objective. Okay, let's do something about that. So let's go back to the portfolio. Here's my list of all my projects in my prioritization list. If I go to my associated objectives, increase our brand awareness, it's going to filter the list to now only look at the projects that we have proposed, on hold, and active that relate to and contribute to the accomplishment of that objective. Now let's look at some resourcing. So if I bring the resource data back in, now it's looking at the level of commitment of the resources that are on these projects. So I'm going to quickly just drop the proposed and the on hold. And you can see I've still got some resource problems, but I could look now and say, we're off track. So do we need to add headcount? Clearly, we've got 2 individuals potentially that are very key to our getting this stuff done that are over allocated. I may want to now look at how we could move some work off of their plate. I've got another project that's proposed that might really help us get to our objective. How do I fit it in? Where do I put it? And I've got one on hold. Should we restart that? Or do we need to take resources from it and so forth? So we have a variety of decisions we can make. So maybe I want to bring the proposed project in. It's going to cause the resourcing to go a little wonky, and then I'm going to maybe move that project, move that project out, say we're going to do it. Now you can see we're starting to clean some of this up. It's a little cleaner. We've got some more work to do. Maybe we try and pull this one forward. Let's assume for a minute that we're working on planning out our next fiscal and where these things are going to land. Now I've caused a different problem. These critical resources are clearly, they're on projects that are involved, related to this objective, but they're also on others. And as I start to move stuff around, I continue to run into those conflicts. I could come in here and see, what's the other project that's in play here. Frankly, we've just over allocated this individual. And so we need to sort of work through that and figure out how we take this data, how maybe we add someone else to these projects to get stuff done, because this objective matters and we're off track. So I'll close with this sort of this story. We looked at the strategy up front intentionally so that we could see at the end how that linkage to that, understanding what projects we're doing or have planned to do, help us achieve some key results to meet an objective, and being able to look today through the lens of resourcing to say, where do we have resourcing constraints and challenges that are preventing us from focusing on or delivering on a key objective that we have? So we can look at the portfolio in its entirety, which I did first, and then sort of give the resource managers their marching orders for who to assign to which projects, which ones are greenlit, and so forth. And then we could take a more detailed lens and say, we've got an objective we have to meet, or we're behind on, or we're not looking good on it. How do we fix that? So the resourcing is a critical juncture or critical component for a lot of this, and it's how we use this data to help us guide our decisions and assign the people where we need them. And with that, Jim, I'll wrap up the demo.
Thanks, Paul. Appreciate the great demo on those pieces. Let me get back and let me know when you can see my screen.
I can.
All right, terrific. Well, let's summarize and talk about some potential next steps for you. In summary, what we covered here today is that resource management is a critical success factor for overall PPM success, that it's a dimension that has to be considered when we commit to projects, and that our approaches and processes we use, or at least start off with as an organization, should align with our organizational readiness and maturity. We should be honest with ourselves about where we're at in that regard. And that high-level capacity planning, that top-down piece, if we're not doing it today, that's not a bad place to start. Now, detailed resource allocation on work items and schedules and things can follow as you're ready or as needed, if you need it at all for what you're doing in your organization. Hopefully we showed you today that OnePlan provides a great platform for all the PPM capabilities and all the dimensions that we talked about, both portfolio and resource that we focused on today, and that it also extends existing solutions to provide visual planning and capabilities so that we can bring in data from things like Project or Azure DevOps or wherever it might be. And it also enhances all other aspects of top-down strategic planning and analysis, so we can actually put a strategic plan in place so we can strategically align our projects, like Paul said, and then factor in our resource management by prioritizing things that align with our strategies, okay? And OnePlan, Paul chose to show it to you in Microsoft Teams today. It's fully integrated and embedded in the Microsoft Cloud. You could access it directly from a browser, or you can use it within the Microsoft environments that you're in today, right from within Teams or Azure DevOps or Power Apps, whatever it might be. So from a next step perspective, as you take away what's here, I think we need to be honest with ourselves as organizations, and the graphic on the right is about taking baby steps. If you're just embarking upon this, or you're trying to evolve into the next stage of this, assess and be honest with yourself of what your real level of readiness is and what your organization, both technically and culturally, is willing to sustain right now. And as you understand your resource management maturity and where you're at, and understand the cultural environment that you're in, we can put together a resource management roadmap of what you would like to tackle now. So just because what you tackle now is what you put in place doesn't mean that's where you want to end up. It's just the first stage in your roadmap of where you'd like to get to. And then ultimately we can turn that into a development and developing a practical action plan to get to that next maturity level, and maybe the steps, and do it in a pace that your organization can absorb from a change management perspective. So the other key piece that we find is, a solution like OnePlan does a great job, but we should think about the process that we want to model and automate in here first. Automation is great, but you have to have something that you're automating. So the idea is, think about that process, and as you implement this, think about what you want that to be, and enable at least what you think you can do today, and then we can add to it as you mature through this evolution. We do webinars like this all the time. We're doing a similar one next week on have we completed a financial plan that aligns with your corporate strategy. We'll be talking about financial planning in that dimension in a little more detail, and how that aligns with strategic planning as well. So that's next Thursday at this same time. You can try this stuff out on AppSource at Microsoft. If you look for OnePlan, there's an adaptive project and portfolio management trial out there that you can use that would allow you to do all the things that you saw in here with strategy and resource management, portfolio management. It's kind of the full breadth type of solution trial that you might want. We also have other dedicated ones on things just like only strategy. We have one that's dedicated to Agile portfolio management, as well as one that is focused on professional services organizations, as well as just collaborative work and project management concepts. We'd also like to offer you a free roadmap workshop. If you're intrigued by what you see here today, and you want to understand what it might take to get you into an initial stage in a solution like this, we can work with you on reviewing your current use of solutions and tools, assess your current requirements and that desired future state you might have, and determine how to implement or migrate into a new solution like this and tackle the things that you'd be ready for. We can provide you an implementation roadmap and an idea of what that would cost. Some of the licenses on the Microsoft side especially you may already own today. So a free trial, you could take us up on the free roadmap workshop, or if you're not that far along and you are curious about more details about how these things apply specifically to you, we're happy to schedule a personalized one-on-one demo where we can talk to you about your own individual requirements and put things in that context. You can reach out to us generally at contact@oneplan.ai. You're going to get a copy of these slides, so if you're interested in talking to myself or to Paul directly, feel free to reach out to us individually as well. I would just like to say that the reason we do this is we want to make improvements within organizations, and we want to see success. We are invested in your success, and that's what makes us go every day. So we would love to engage with you. Let us know if we can help, and just like to thank you for your time today. Have a great day.